flash of light. Beware the existence of mind, and grasp time in your conscious mind.
The Shore is a first-person Lovecraftian horror game about a man who washes up on a beach of a mysterious island and encounters supernatural things. Atmosphere. There's a vague air of sadness that seems to hang over the island, and it feels cold and lifeless with its grey-blue ocean and barren rocks, but other than that it's quite peaceful with the relaxing music playing in the background. There's an incredible amount of detail in the environments, from items in the lighthouse to boats washed up on the shore. Everything seems very deliberately designed to imply that it was once lived in but has long since been abandoned. However, there are blatant Cthulhu and various other Lovecraftian entities and creatures placed literally everywhere you go, from the gates with demonic fish heads on them to drawings on the chalkboard, and it removes all the subtlety from the experience entirely. In the later game, a lot of the environmental designs are ominous and spooky, with walls of flesh, black rocks, or metal structures that seem to have been crafted by an alien species, but there's a very artificial feeling to everything. From the way the game prevents exploration with very clear, invisible walls, to the lackluster way things are just dumped on the island with no explanation at all. Like the pool of unknown creatures is really interesting, but so static instead of being ominous with how little interactivity there is with it. It's just there, like it was designed before anyone had a reason for it to be there and they didn't want the work to go to waste. The game has many big reveal sections with monsters being freed, and the music that plays alongside them conflicts with the tone completely, like freeing these supposedly terrifying otherworldly creatures is some grand event to be cherished. The later game drops most of the exploration in favour of jumping the player from location to location and fighting enemies, putting simple puzzles or combat in front of them, and despite the dramatic way some things are done, it never really amounts to anything. At best, lifelessness is a feeling, an ominous sadness, but at worst, there's nothing. That's no Harry Masons. Scares. The whole concept of fear of the unknown is kind of abandoned early in the game, and it presents mythical being after mythical being like they're on display at a museum. Many of the supposedly great old ones are just sitting there waiting for you to free them, with a simple puzzle keeping them asleep or trapped, and when you do free them, nothing much happens. Releasing them sets off set pieces, and they're very impressive and awesome, but just not frightening. They're relying on the design to be intimidating to the player, but I personally found the designs to be either interesting or just a generic artist depiction of what Lovecraft's Cthulhu work has always looked like. It's very difficult to be afraid of the unknown when it's something you've seen before. Besides these, the enemy combat is too easy to be frightening, and the rooms where you need to figure out a puzzle to prevent death reach into tedious before they start being frightening. The game doesn't have much to fall back on. There are some creepy moments with statues with moving eyes, and some randomly played noises that can be a little unnerving. The game also has a single chase sequence that was unexpected, but sadly over too soon. For a game based on Lovecraft's work, it hasn't really tried to adapt any of the main draws of it, except for its visual style. That's still no Harry Mason's. Sound design. The music reminds me of old adventure games, the way it fades in and out when you enter buildings. Some of it also has an old school vibe, with the lighthouse having ancient sounding mysterious drones like an old Casio keyboard's rendition of a cello. There's soft but uncertain strings that play as you walk around the island, which is very calming when combined with the waves. Some of the more otherworldly music that plays as you go deeper into the game is a bit more generic, but it is clearly trying hard to bring more atmosphere to the environments. Some of the sound effects can be a bit annoying and repeat a lot, with some of the noises the monsters make just being the same thing, pitch shifted up and down accordingly. Nearly everything else seems to be a stock effect of some kind, and most of them were pretty overused. But many just left no impact at all.
As a young boy, I remember my father talking about this island. He described it in a way that would scare the listener. He spoke of black butterflies, corpse candles, and broken compasses.
The voice acting is strange, with characters that have great sounding voices that somehow sound forced. Sometimes the game's protagonist Andrew's lines are profound sounding and impressive, and other times it's just not convincing at all.
What is happening to me?
It's not important. What's most important is the exchange for coming this far. Your resilience of both mind and body is extraordinary.
Similarly, the voice of the entity that talks to you sounds pretty forced too, and a bit artificial. They sound like the same person doing voices, and it could all just be audio filters separating the two. The directional audio is perfectly functional, but there was a bit of a lack of reverb in areas where I felt there should be some. It's never straight up bad, but all its shortcomings add up. That's still no Harry Mason's. Gore. When you kill enemies, they explode into black blood, and the effect leaves a bit to be desired. Other things, like the flesh monsters near the end of the game, are designed so well that they're sickening to look at, with realistic slimy flesh. Other than that, there's not much gore to speak of, which is appropriate for the game. That's one Harry Mason. Story. The game begins with protagonist Andrew washing up on the shore, and the game sort of limps onwards from there, with a lot of references to Andrew's missing daughter and his general confusion to the situation in his voice lines. The story feels somewhat absent, with Andrew going along with a mysterious entity because it promises to reunite him with his daughter. There are a few sparse diary entries that explain previous events on the island, but it feels like they cover very little in the large amount of unexplained things. Most of the story is told sporadically through voice lines Andrew mutters to himself as the game goes on, bringing up things about the past, but it's rare and he's sometimes pretty vague with the details, which makes the timeline hard to follow. The game doesn't really explain much else until the very end, where it sort of tries to summarize events leading up to the game, but it still doesn't seem to convey what's happening very well, and then finishes with a disappointing, ambiguous ending. I find it incredibly difficult to follow or get invested in the game's story, what little there was of it, making the final score 1 out of 5 Harry Masons. The designers have clearly spent a lot of time on graphics and very little on anything else. There are a slew of problems from repetitive gameplay to failing to harness the basic concept of Lovecraft's brand of cosmic horror. The game shows promise, but it needs a lot of work. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion then that's cool, I get it. There'll be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. Always go check out Bumps in the Middle of the Night. Peace.